The snow came down like ash, soft, weightless, unspoken. It covered the world in hush, burying every noise but the moan of wind and the creak of the empty station sign that hung crooked above the platform. Cora May Tillman stood beneath it, arms locked around her small carpet bag, boots soaked through, bonnet sagging under the snow's damp kiss. The train had long since gone, and with it, the man who was supposed to claim her hand. She had waited for 3 hours, long enough for the warmth to leave her toes and pride to leave her bones. Her lips trembled but didn't speak. The note in her coat pocket was wrinkled now, its promise smudged with melted snow. Sam Tillman, once her cousin, once her fiancé, had written it in a crooked scrawl, "Meet me in Eden's Hollow. I'll make things right." But no one came for her. No name was called. No hand reached. She could have wept if there was anyone to see it. But in the absence of witnesses, she stayed dry-eyed and silent, like a scarecrow forgotten in a winter field. Her breath fogged the air, each exhale slow, reluctant. She shifted her weight, ankle aching from cold, and tried not to imagine her father's words echoing, "A woman who gets left don't get claimed again. They smell it on you, like rot on peaches." The town hadn't offered her shelter. The station agent had muttered something about rooms being full and walked off, hunched like a crow. That's when she heard the hoofbeats. Not the dainty clatter of a town horse, but the deep, ground-hollowing rhythm of a draft beast. Through the wall of white came a man tall as a pine, broad as a barn door, bare-chested under a buffalo-hide coat. Snow crusted his shoulders, steam rose off the horse beneath him. His eyes were narrow, black beneath the brim of a wet hat. He didn't look at her at first. Just dismounted with the unhurried strength of a man who'd fought storms and won. He tied his horse, adjusted the blanket on its back, then finally turned. She straightened. He was older than her by only a year or two, but the way he carried his silence made him seem older still. His face was unshaven, his chest scarred. His body looked carved from the same wood as the wagon's yoke. "You stuck?" he asked, voice low, like it hadn't been used all day. She didn't answer. Not at first. Her lips parted, then closed again. What could she say? That she had no ride, no coin, no man, no right to be standing in another town's good sense? He looked at her again. Not her soaked dress or the way her glove was tearing at the palm. He looked at her face, and something in his jaw moved like he decided something. "Get in the wagon." She blinked. "I don't know you." "No," he said. "But the wolves do." Her breath caught. "I live 3 miles out. Storm's thickening. You won't make it to a room. Station's locking up." "I'll be fine," she lied. "You're already freezing," he replied without heat. Then he turned, walked toward the wagon, and climbed up. He didn't look back. He didn't coax. Just sat there, the reins slack in one hand, waiting. And something in that silence, not demand, not pity, just waiting, broke whatever scrap of pride she had left. Her fingers, blue at the tips, tightened around her bag. She stepped forward, snow crunching. Her knees wobbled, the world spun. She swayed. The next thing she knew, he was beside her, having come down again. He didn't touch her. Just held out his coat so she could crawl into its warmth as she climbed up. She smelled pine tar, smoke, saddle leather. She didn't look at him as she sat, teeth chattering. He slapped the reins once. The wagon lurched forward. They rode through white, slow and quiet, the wind licking at their skin. She pulled the coat tighter, stared at her frozen hands. He didn't ask questions. She didn't explain. Time passed like smoke rising in a chimney, curling, uncounted. The forest lined the path, branches heavy with snow, and the road blurred into pale nothingness. Once, she asked, "What's your name?" "Elias Boone." She held that name like a candle cupped in both palms. Later, she whispered, "I'm Cora May." He nodded once, eyes ahead. By the time the cabin appeared through the swirl, night was bleeding into the sky. The cabin sat low and wide, built of stone and timber with a rusted lantern hanging from a nail. Smoke curled from the chimney, and 2 dogs rose from the porch, tails still, ears back. They didn't bark. Elias helped her down, then led the way. She followed, shivering. Inside, it was sparse table, hearth, a bed in the corner, folded quilts stacked with care. No woman's touch, but nothing mean or neglected either. He tossed a log into the fire, stirred the coals, then pointed to the bench by the hearth. She sat. He ladled stew from a black pot. No questions. Just handed her a tin bowl. It burned her hands with welcome heat. She sipped. Salt in time. The best thing she'd tasted in months. He stoked the fire again, then stood. "I'll sleep in the barn," he said, like it was nothing. "There's quilts if you're cold." She looked up. Her throat thickened. "Why'd you bring me here?" He paused at the door. "Seemed wrong to leave you." Then he stepped outside, coat catching on the doorframe before it vanished into dark. She ate slow. When done, she folded the blanket on her lap, walked to the cot, and sat. She didn't cry. Not yet. Just lay back and stared at the low rafters. Later that night, she woke coughing dry and raw. The fire had died down. She pulled the blanket higher and reached under her blouse. The letter was still there. She unfolded it. "Meet me in Eden's Hollow. I'll make things right. Liar." She crumpled it, held it tight in her fist until sleep stole her back. Outside, the snow whispered its soft secrets to the land, but inside, the silence was warmer than any fire she'd known in months. And though no promises had been made, none asked, somewhere in that wind-beaten cabin, something had begun. Not love. Not yet. But the absence of loneliness. And that was something close. The morning broke blue and white, sharp as a blade. Light spilled across the quilt like spilled milk, softening the splinters of shadow in the corners of the room. Cora blinked awake to the low crackle of the fire, a draft curling around her ankles. She reached for her boots, stiff with frost, and slipped them on with quiet shame. The stew pot on the hearth was still warm. Elias had kept it going. He hadn't come back inside. She pulled her shawl tighter, crossed to the window, and looked out. The world lay silent and wrapped in snow, the kind that clung to fence posts and muted sound. The barn sat squat and still across the yard, smoke curling faintly from its side chimney. A rooster called once, then gave up. He was already working. She stepped back, ran her hands through her hair, and pressed the wrinkles from her skirt. The mirror on the wall was no bigger than a saucer, but it showed enough: wind-burned cheeks, lips cracked at the corners, eyes ringed with sleepless shadow. She looked like a woman whose promises had dried up before winter. And still, she was alive. Not a bad start. She found a small rag hanging by the stove, dipped it in warm water, and wiped her face. She folded the quilt with care and laid it at the foot of the bed. Everything in this house had its place. Even her, for now. Outside, she walked carefully toward the barn, boots crunching on the snow-iced path. Her fingers ached. The wind was less cruel this morning, but still sharp. The barn door was open just a crack. She pushed it gently and stepped inside. The warmth hit first thick with hay and animal breath. A low moo sounded from one stall. The horses shifted. And there he was. Elias knelt beside a calf, swaddled in burlap and wool, bottle in one hand. The animal sucked greedily, eyes wide and wet. His shirt was half-buttoned, sleeves rolled, scar crossing his left shoulder. A lantern flickered beside him. "You shouldn't be out in that cold," he said, without looking. "I wanted to thank you," she said quietly. "For not asking questions." Still, he didn't look at her. Just wiped the calf's chin and sat back on his heels. Questions usually come with expectations. "I don't have much to give. I didn't ask for anything." His voice was level, but not unkind. She felt it land in her chest like a stone skipping across still water. She stepped closer. The calf blinked up at her. She knelt slowly, ran her hand across its soft ear. It leaned into her palm. "What happened to its mother?" she asked. "Didn't make it through the last freeze." She nodded, but the words pressed something in her chest. It's hungry. Won't be for long. They were quiet again. The silence between them had grown familiar, like old wood settling. She turned slightly toward him. Elias. I need to earn my keep. He glanced at her, finally. You don't owe me. I do, she said, firmer than she meant to. Let me help. He studied her for a beat longer than comfort allowed. Then, with a grunt, he stood and handed her a pair of gloves from a peg on the wall. Start with the woodpile. We're gonna need plenty come dusk. She took them. They were too big, worn at the seams. But they were warm. She nodded once and headed out. By midday, her arms were shaking from the effort. The axe was heavy, the wood stubborn. Still, she worked. Splinters flew. Snow melted on her brow. Her skirts caught on a splintered stump, tore slightly, but she didn't stop. Somewhere behind the barn, she heard him tending to the fence, hammer ringing against post. When her hand slipped and the axe bit the skin of her thumb, it didn't bleed much, but it stung something awful. She sucked in a breath, stumbled backward. You all right? He was there again, like he'd been watching all along. She shook her head. It's fine. Just a scratch. Let me see. He crossed the yard in 4 long strides, took her hand before she could protest. His touch was rough, warm, careful. He examined the cut, turned her hand over like it was something breakable. Need cleaning. I can do it. I know, he said, but didn't let go. He led her back to the cabin. She sat by the fire while he washed the wound in warm water and wrapped it with cloth torn from a flour sack. She didn't speak. Neither did he. The heat of the flames made her face prickle, and her eyes, traitorous things, began to well. He saw it but said nothing. Just folded the ends of the bandage, tied it gently. Thank you, she whispered. He stood, cleared his throat, and stirred the fire. There's biscuits left. Eat while they're warm. She nodded, unable to speak. Her mouth tasted like salt and smoke. That night, she washed the bowls, dried them with a towel that had been patched with old embroidery thread. A woman's handiwork, years gone. She wondered about her. Elias had said nothing of family. When the dishes were done, she sat in the corner chair, hands folded in her lap, watching the flames lick the chimney throat. He sat across the room, sharpening a knife with slow, steady rhythm. She couldn't see his eyes, but she felt them occasionally lifting toward her then away again, like tides. The letter in her pocket was still there. She hadn't read it since the station, but she hadn't let it go. Not yet. She didn't know how to thank a man who asked for nothing. Not with words. Not with touch. So she folded the towel neatly. Smoothed the quilt. Left the hearth swept. Small things, quiet offerings. When she finally lay down to sleep, she whispered into the dark, not knowing if he'd hear, "It's been a long time since anyone treated me like I wasn't something to fix." Outside, the wind had gentled, brushing the cabin like a mother's palm. In the barn, the calf suckled in sleep, alive because someone had fed it with his own hands. And inside the woman who had once been left behind, something stirred. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But the beginning of thaw. The town of Eden's Hollow didn't take kindly to questions, nor to women who arrived without a man's name to vouch for them. Cora stood beside Elias in the back of the wagon, hands tucked into borrowed gloves, her shawl knotted beneath her chin. Snow had melted to slush, the roads lined with mud and ice. The wagon wheels groaned in the ruts, but Elias didn't speak. He held the reins loosely, his face unreadable beneath his hat brim. She hadn't asked to come into town. He had simply said, "We need flour," and looked at her as if to say, "I won't leave you alone again." It should have warmed her. Instead, it filled her with something tighter, harder to name. The town was where her story could unravel. And people in towns, small, whispering, winter-sour towns, had long memories in sharper tongues. Children stopped playing as the wagon passed. A man tipping his hat to Elias paused when his eyes found Cora. Then turned without finishing the gesture. They tethered the horse outside O'Malley's mercantile. The bell above the door rang sharp when they stepped inside. "Boone," said the man behind the counter. Gray-bearded, short-sleeved despite the cold. "Didn't expect you before spring thaw." Elias gave a short nod. "Need what I left on order." "And more flour." The shopkeep's eyes drifted to Cora. She kept hers down. "This her?" Elias didn't answer. The man shrugged. "Town's been talkin'. Heard a woman was left at the station. Some say she weren't right in the head. Others say she's Tillman's cast off." Cora felt it like a slap made of words. Elias's voice came low and steady. "She's here with me." There was silence then, heavier than the sound of the bell or the creak of boots on floorboards. The man said nothing else. Just went to gather the order. Cora moved toward the far shelf, fingers grazing tins of tobacco, buttons, thread. Her cheeks burned. She turned slightly, catching her reflection in the smudged glass of the door. Her bonnet was crooked. Her collar stained from wood smoke. She didn't belong. She never had. And now, the whole town knew it. When they stepped back outside, she climbed into the wagon without help. He stowed the sack of goods, tied it down, and climbed up beside her. As they rolled away, she asked, "You knew they'd talk?" "They always do," he said. "But you brought me anyway." He didn't answer. At the edge of town, she caught sight of a pair of eyes in a window. A girl, maybe 16, watched them go. Her expression was part pity, part fear. Back at the cabin, Cora stormed inside ahead of him, peeled off her gloves, slammed them on the table. "You should have warned me." He didn't follow right away. She heard the creak of the wagon being unhitched, the murmured words to the horse. Finally, he stepped in, snow melting off his boots. "I did." "You didn't say it'd be like that." "You already knew it would." She turned to him. "Why are you doing this?" His eyes were unreadable. "Doing what?" "Taking care of me like I'm something you're trying to fix." "I'm not." She laughed bitterly. "Then what? Guilt? Pity?" His face changed then. Just slightly. The faintest twitch of muscle in his cheek. He stepped forward once. "I know what it's like to be left standing." She blinked. "I know what it's like when the thing you were promised turns its back." For a moment, the fire crackled like a third voice. Cora sat slowly on the edge of the bed. Her hands trembled in her lap. "What happened to her?" she asked. He didn't look away. "She got sick. Fast. Childbed fever. We were 2 hours from a doctor." "And the baby?" He shook his head. She stared at the floorboards, the worn knots and cracks that had held other confessions. "That's why you live out here. It's quieter." Neither of them spoke for a while. The wind hissed at the window like it wanted in. Elias crossed to the stove, ladled broth into 2 bowls, set one in front of her. She sipped it slowly, carefully. Then spoke again. "I thought I'd be married by now. I thought maybe he'd seen something good in me." Elias said nothing. She let the steam warm her face. But maybe he just saw someone smaller than himself. And when he got tired, he walked away. He stood, returned to his chair near the fire, and looked at her over the rim of his cup. "You didn't get smaller," he said quietly. "You just stopped asking anyone to carry your weight." It was the kindest thing anyone had ever said to her. That night, as the wind kicked against the cabin and the dogs barked once then quieted, Cora lay awake, eyes tracing the beams above. She heard him shift in his chair, where he'd taken to sleeping lately instead of the barn. She listened to the rhythm of his breathing. She thought of her old life, corsets too tight, silence at supper, a father who drank too much and brothers who called her burdensome. And now, here, there was a man who didn't ask for anything, but always made room. She reached into her coat and pulled out the letter again. The ink was fading, the corners soft from so much handling. She read the words slowly. I'll make things right. She folded it carefully, returned it to her pocket, and turned toward the firelight. In that moment, she still didn't believe in promises. But she was starting to believe in presence. And that, maybe, was better. Spring hadn't come yet, but the edges of the world were softening. The snow still lay in drifts along the fence lines, but the creek had begun to run again, its voice threading through the trees like a forgotten lullaby. Elias had taken to splitting wood in the mornings, bare-armed and wordless, while Cora swept the porch or stitched the frayed seams of her dress beside the fire. They moved around each other like tides, quiet, constant, pulling and receding without ever naming what they were becoming. She tried not to think about the letter anymore. It stayed folded in the drawer beside her cot, tucked under a spare pair of wool stockings and the red ribbon she used to tie her hair on Sundays. She hadn't read it in days. She didn't need to. But still, some mornings, she'd catch herself staring out at the road, half listening for hoofbeats that never came. The part of her that had once clung to apology still wanted something to end with words. A reason. A reckoning. One cold dawn, she rose before the fire had been stoked and quietly packed her things. She didn't slam drawers or fold loudly. She didn't cry. Just gathered the meager contents of her life, gloves, thread, ribbon, the letter, and placed them in her carpetbag. The door creaked when she opened it, and the sky was still pale with unrisen light. The world outside was breathless. The snow crunched underfoot as she crossed the yard, her coat buttoned to the throat. The path into the woods, the one that led eventually back toward Eden's Hollow, gleamed silver with frost. She didn't make it to the trees. He was there, standing in the middle of the yard, holding a battered tin bucket filled with milk for the calf. His eyes met hers. The snow swirled gently between them. "You leavin'?" he asked. "I was thinking about it," she replied. He set the bucket down and straightened. "Need me to hitch the wagon?" The calm in his voice pricked something in her. She looked away. "No. You think you're trouble to me. I know I am. You're wrong." Her arms tightened around the bag. "You didn't ask for a woman to show up at your doorstep with nothing but bad luck and a worse name." "No," he said. "But she came anyway." Silence hung between them. The calf bleated softly from the barn. Somewhere behind them, a crow cawed. She opened her mouth, then closed it. He stepped forward once, slowly, like approaching a spooked animal. "You don't owe me your staying. But don't leave because you think you're unworthy of it." Her throat tightened. "Why haven't you tried to make me into something easier?" "Because broken things don't need shaping. They need gentling." The words knocked something loose in her chest. She blinked quickly, looking down at her worn boots, at the frost glittering on the hem of her skirt. "I don't know what to do with kindness," she whispered. "You don't have to do anything with it," he said. "Just don't run from it." Her hands shook. She let the bag fall to the ground. Her shoulders slumped. That night, the sky turned dark too early. A wind rose from the north, sharp and unrelenting, and snow began to fall again in heavy, wet clumps. Elias brought in the calf from the barn, fearing the cold would take it. He made a place for it by the hearth, lining the space with wool and burlap. Cora wrapped her arms around herself as she watched him. He moved with such quiet precision, as if everything he touched might break. She lit a second lantern just before supper. The chimney had begun to smoke strangely, and the fire crackled with an edge that made her uneasy. "Do you smell that?" she asked. He paused, sniffed. "Smoke's not drawing right." He opened the damper. A gust of wind whooshed down the flue, bringing with it a spray of ash and a flurry of sparks. The fire surged too high, licking the mantel. Then the room filled with smoke, thick, black, sudden. "Get low," Elias barked, grabbing the bucket and dousing the hearth. The flames hissed, steam clouding the air. Cora coughed, her eyes watering. She dropped to her knees, crawling toward the door, but the smoke was curling faster than she could move. Then she felt his arms, strong, urgent, as he scooped her up and pushed through the door. Outside, the snowstorm was howling. Wind lashed at them, and the cold was a slap to her lungs after the heat and smoke. He carried her to the edge of the porch, set her down in a pile of snow, then dropped to his knees beside her. His shirt was wet with sweat and soot, steam rising from his bare shoulders. "You all right?" he asked, voice hoarse. She nodded, coughing hard. "You're not wearing your coat." "Didn't think on it," he muttered, brushing hair from her face. "Fire's out. Smoke's just chokin' dot." They sat like that a long time, backs pressed to the cold rail, the storm falling in curtains around them. She reached for his hand. It was red from heat, rough with old scars and new burns. She took it gently in hers, cradling it against her cheek. "You didn't leave," she whispered. "I don't," he said. The calf bawled weakly from inside, safe now beside the cooled hearth. Later, when the air had cleared and the fire rebuilt, they sat wrapped in quilts, side by side. She poured water over his burned knuckles, her hands shaking just a little. "I almost left today," she said. "I know. But I didn't." He looked at her, eyes steady. "I know that, too." Outside, the wind had begun to settle. The snow softened to a hush. She rested her head on his shoulder for the first time. And in that quiet cabin, flickering with new warmth, she let herself believe, just barely, that maybe she was no longer someone to run from. Maybe she was staying. Not out of shame, but choice. The earth was beginning to breathe again. The snow receded into patches beneath the pines, and crocuses pushed blindly from soil that had forgotten softness. Each morning, the light lingered a little longer, and the creak behind Elias's cabin ran louder than the silence between them. Cora was planting seeds in the thawed corner of the yard when she noticed the bench. It hadn't been there the day before. Just appeared overnight, made of sanded wood and anchored facing east. It wasn't perfect, one leg shorter than the others, a notch too deep in the backrest, but it had been shaped by a careful hand. She sat on it slowly. Her fingers grazed the grains. No words had been spoken about it. That was Elias's way. He didn't offer explanations. He offered space. From the porch, he watched her quietly, arms folded across his chest, an apple in one hand. Their eyes met once. She smiled. He looked away, but not before the corners of his mouth curved, just enough to see it. She started sitting there most mornings, warming her back in the sun, feeling the way time softened the shape of her grief. She still dreamt of Sam some nights, his voice, his promises, but she no longer woke from them trembling. The letter remained in the drawer. Unread. Unimportant. One morning, Elias came in holding a paper from town. "Auctions in 2 days," he said, placing it on the table. She wiped her hands on her apron. "You going?" "Thinking on it. They've got seed, tools. I could use a better harness." She nodded, then hesitated. "Would you want me to come?" He looked at her for a long, unreadable moment. "I wouldn't mind it," he said. It was the closest he'd come to asking her anything. 2 days later, she wore the ribbon in her hair. Not to impress, but to remember she was still a woman. She rode beside him in the wagon, her hand resting on the edge of the seat, just near enough to his but not touching. People stared, of course. They always had. But this time, she lifted her chin. Eden's Hollow was bustling with noise. The auctioneer's voice cracked like a whip as tools were held aloft, cattle prodded through pens, wagons lined the muddy square. They stood side by side as Elias bartered for fence wire. He let her pick out seeds, squash, beans, tomatoes. She held the paper sacks like treasures. For the first time, she was imagining something longer than a season. Something that might grow. But peace, like spring, was always short-lived in a place like this. It happened near the general store. A voice behind her, too familiar, too sharp. "Well, I'll be damned." She turned. Sam Tillman stood not 10 feet away, a smirk coiled around his mouth. He wore a clean coat, hair neatly combed, a woman hanging on his arm. Younger. Pink cheeks. Frilled sleeves. I thought you'd taken the train back east, Cora May, he said, loud enough for others to hear. Didn't expect you to be. His eyes flicked to Elias, shacked up with a mountain. Cora's hands trembled. Her breath caught. Elias stepped forward, quiet but firm, until the space between him and Sam shrank to nothing. The woman beside Sam stepped back. Elias said nothing. Just looked down at the man who'd once written "I'll make things right" and then vanished like smoke through a sieve. Sam tried to hold his grin, but it faltered. She was never meant for hard living, Boone. You know that. She cried if her tea water boiled wrong. She ain't crying now, Elias said calmly. Sam laughed, nervous. Well, she sure looks different. Guess every broken piece fits somewhere, right? Then Elias said it. Clear. Certain. She's not staying with me. The crowd quieted. She's home. The silence was louder than any shout. Sam's mouth opened, then shut. His fingers twitched like he'd try for pride, but no one laughed with him this time. Not even the woman on his arm. He turned, muttering something, and walked off stiff-legged through the mud. Elias turned back to Cora. Her face was pale, but her eyes were clear. You all right? He asked. She nodded once, then again, stronger. When they returned to the cabin that evening, she didn't speak at first. She placed the seed packets gently on the table, then sat down by the hearth. He stoked the fire. The flames grew. She reached into the drawer, pulled out the letter, creased, fragile, and held it over the flame. It curled in her fingers, blackening at the corners. Words faded. Promises turned to ash. She let go. It fell into the hearth and vanished. He watched her without speaking. She crossed the room and sat beside him, close enough now that their shoulders touched. Elias, she whispered. Yeah. I don't know how to say it, but thank you. You don't have to. I want to. He turned slightly, one arm resting along the back of the bench. His fingertips brushed her shoulder, barely a touch, but enough to send warmth through every cold place that still lingered in her. Would you mind if I stayed longer? She asked, her voice catching. You're not a guest, he said. She looked down, a soft smile on her lips. Then what am I? He looked at her fully now, as if seeing not the woman who had been left but the woman who had stayed. You're someone I build benches for, he said. Someone I make room for. She rested her head on his chest. The wind picked up outside, tossing the trees, but inside the cabin, the fire glowed steady. There were no declarations, no vows. Just breath, and warmth, and a silence that held more promise than any letter ever could. Somewhere behind them, the calf stirred in its stall, spring pressing its face to the windows, asking to be let in. And she, once forgotten at a train station in snow, knew without doubt. She wasn't someone who had been taken in. She was someone who had been chosen. Some hearts don't announce themselves with thunder. Some arrive quietly, covered in ash and snow, and set about the business of staying. You don't always know love when it starts. But you feel it when you stop looking for the door. And in the hush between two people who've survived too much to speak easily, you may find something stronger than romance, belonging. And when that finds you, don't question it. Just sit down beside it. Build something. Let spring in.